The reason we're going to look at benchmarks for our fraction, and we're going to use a number line, is because it helps to visualise the value of our fraction, or how big they are. So let's look at a number line from 0 to 1, because we've got 2/3. So we haven't got a whole, we've got 2 out of 3 parts. So let's break this into those 3 parts, and we'll label them 1/3, 2/3. So if we look at the number 2, our numerator, that tells us how many parts we've got. 1, 2. So that's 2/3. Let's put a mark there. Now what we can do with that information is use benchmarks. We're going to plot 1/3 and check it against the benchmarks of 0 and 1 to see if it's closer to 0 or 1. If you had to pick either of those numbers, which one would you pick? So here's our number line from 0 to 1. Now our denominator is 3, so we need 3 equal parts. And our numerator is 1, so there's 1/3. There's 2/3. Now if we mark 1/3, what we can do now is see if it's closer to 0 or 1. And you might already be able to tell, but let's just check. That's how far it has to travel to get to 0. But if it wants to get to 1, it has to travel further. In fact, that's twice as far. So you can see there that it's closer to 0. So 1/3 is closer to 0 than it is to 1. What if it's not a unit fraction? Well, we can still do the same thing. So let's check 5/6. We've got a denominator of 6, so we're going to need 6 parts, and our numerator is 5. So if we mark 5/6, now we can have a look. Now I can see where it's closer to 0 or 1, but let's just double check. If we have to go to 1, it's not very far at all, but 0 is all the way down there. In fact, we have to go through 5/6 to get there, but only 1/6 to get to 1, so it's closer to 1. This time we're going to use a benchmark of 1/2 and see whether 3/10 is closer to 0 or 1/2. Now we can do the same thing, it's just that we're going to compare it not just to the endpoints, but to 0 and 1/2. So let's mark 1/2 on there. Now our denominator is actually tenths, and 1/2 is 5/10. So that helps us to think about what 1/2 is. Now if we actually split this into 10 equal parts, we can plot 3/10. And we can then compare that to 0 or 1/2 to see which one it's closer to. And sometimes you might want to draw a loop or a little arrow and leave them both there to compare. So which one is the smallest distance it had to travel? If you look, you can see it's actually closer to 1/2 than it is to 0. So 3/10 is closer to 1/2. Now if our benchmark's 1, we can still use the same process. This time we've got 5/8 as our fraction. So our denominator is 8. We need 8 equal parts. So if we mark 1/2, we know we need 4 equal parts that side and 4 equal parts on the other side. Now 1/2 is 4/8 and we need 5/8, so it's going to actually be right next to it, the next one along. So thinking of 1/2 as 4/8 could be really helpful. Now we want to know if that's closer to 1/2 or 1. Now don't forget, this time we're not looking at comparing it to 0. So we're going to go to 1/2 first. So it's only travelling that far. And then we're going to compare it to 1. So let's have a look. So it's got to go further to 1. So it's actually closer to 1/2.